There are 8 of them left. Stone towers, carved from single pieces of granite, rising from a plateau in northern Ethiopia. The largest that ever stood. 33 meters of solid stone. Lies where it fell. No one recorded when. No one recorded why. It simply stopped standing. At some point in the long, quiet decline of one of the most extraordinary civilizations the ancient world ever produced. This is Aksum. For approximately 600 years, from roughly the 1st to the 7th century AD, this city was one of the 4 most powerful civilizations on Earth. Not by its own estimation, by Rome's. The Roman historian and philosopher Mani, writing in the 3rd century AD, listed the 4 greatest kingdoms of the world: Rome, Persia, China, and Aksum. You know Rome. You know Persia. You know China. And Aksum was the empire that minted its own gold coins when most of Africa was not yet using metal currency. That built these towers from single pieces of mountain. That controlled the Red Sea trade when the Red Sea was the most valuable commercial corridor on Earth. And that became the first nation in the world to put a cross on its currency. To understand the Aksumite Empire, you have to understand geography, because geography was everything. In the 1st century AD, a Greek merchant compiled a trading manual called The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a practical guide to the ports, goods, and peoples of the Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade. It described a port called Agilis, on the Horn of Africa, a market town of extraordinary commercial activity, receiving goods from deep in the African interior, and trading them to merchants from Rome, Arabia, India, and Persia. Behind Agilis, in the highlands, a capital city, Aksum. The Aksumites had chosen their location with the specific genius of people who understood what made civilizations possible. The coast gave them trade. The highlands gave them food. The position between Africa, Arabia, and the wider Indian Ocean world gave them everything else. Through Aksum's territory moved ivory, gold, frankincense, myrrh, exotic animals, and slaves. The luxury goods that the Roman Empire could not live without and could not produce itself. The Aksumites sat at the source of things that made the Mediterranean world wealthy. And they knew it. From approximately the 3rd century AD, the Aksumite kings minted their own coins in 3 metals, gold, silver, and bronze, with royal portraits and inscriptions in 2 languages: Ge'ez, the Aksumite language, and Greek, the international language of commerce. This was not merely economic sophistication. It was a statement. To mint your own coins, with your own king's face, is to declare sovereignty to every merchant who passes one across a counter. In Alexandria, Ansh, or Rome, the Aksumites were not a civilization that explained itself to others. It simply presented its coins and let them speak. Around 330 AD, almost certainly within a few years of the Roman Emperor Constantine's adoption of Christianity as the empire's religion, the coins of Aksum changed. The crescent and disc symbols that had decorated Aksumite coins for generations, symbols of the pre-Christian religion that the Aksumite kings had practiced, were replaced by a cross. The king who made this change was named Ezana. He is, by most accounts, one of the most consequential rulers in African history. And his story begins not with a religious conversion, but with a shipwreck. The story that the Aksumite tradition preserves, and that the Roman historian Rufinus recorded within a generation of its happening, begins with 2 young men from Syria, Frumentius and Edesius. Scholars, possibly students of philosophy, sailing with a merchant on the Red Sea, when their ship was wrecked on the Aksumite coast. The crew was killed by local tribes. The two scholars, spared because of their education, were taken to the Aksumite court. At court, they flourished. Edesius eventually returned to Syria. Frumentius stayed. He educated the crown princes. He facilitated Christian worship for the Roman merchants living in Aksum. He built, quietly, the first Christian community in this corner of Africa. And when the crown prince Ezana came of age and took the throne, the king his tutor had helped educate, Frumentius traveled to Alexandria to ask the patriarch Athanasius to appoint a bishop for Aksum. Athanasius appointed Frumentius himself. And King Ezana, educated by a shipwrecked Christian scholar, ruling the most powerful kingdom in East Africa, controlling the most valuable trade routes between Africa and the Roman world. Converted, he announced it the way powerful men always announce the things that matter most. He put it on the money. Ethiopia, the civilization that would grow from Aksum, has maintained continuous Christian practice from approximately 340 AD to the present day. One of the oldest continuous Christian traditions in the world. Older than the conversion of most of Europe. Older than the Christian kingdoms of Armenia, Georgia, or Rome's full Christianization. Ezana was not merely a religious reformer. He was a conqueror. In approximately 350 AD, Ezana's armies invaded and destroyed Meroe, the ancient Nubian kingdom that had outlasted the pharaohs and maintained sophisticated civilization in the Nile Valley for a millennium. An inscription Ezana left on a stone stele describes the campaign with the specific matter-of-factness of a king who has never doubted his right to do what he has just done. He destroyed cities. He drove people to the Nile. He brought back cattle and prisoners. And then, in the same inscription, he gave thanks to his God. The Ezana stone, bilingual, in Ge'ez and Greek, is one of the most important inscriptions in the history of African civilization. It records military victories. It records the new faith. It records the specific ambitions of a king who understood that he was living through a transformation of the world. He was right. At its height, the Aksumite Empire controlled approximately 1.25 million square kilometers. It was the dominant power on the Red Sea, meaning it controlled the single most important commercial corridor connecting Rome with the luxury goods of the East. Aksumite merchants traded in India. Aksumite diplomatic missions were received in Persia. Aksumite coins have been found in archaeological sites from Egypt to southern Arabia to the Indian coast. And they built the stelae, those extraordinary stone towers, were already being carved before the Christian era. But after the conversion, the Aksumites turned the same architectural ambition toward churches. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. According to Ethiopian tradition, the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant was founded in Aksum's Christian era. Whether the Ark is truly there is a question the guardians of the Church have maintained for 16 centuries, in the most dignified way imaginable, by not answering it. This was the empire at its height. Militarily dominant, commercially sovereign, architecturally extraordinary, theologically confident, and beneath all of it, the same invisible pressures that have undone every empire in this series. The Aksumite Empire did not fall to a conqueror. It was not destroyed by a plague, or shattered by a civil war, or dismantled by a betrayal. It was made irrelevant. And that, in many ways, is a harder thing to survive. The first pressure came from Persia. For over a century, the Aksumites had maintained significant influence over the Arabian Peninsula, particularly Yemen, which they had invaded and periodically controlled since the 4th century. In the late 6th century, the Sassanid Persians moved into Yemen. The Aksumite presence, military, commercial, ecclesiastical, was systematically removed. The Red Sea's Arabian coast, which Aksum had treated as its own sphere of influence, was no longer theirs. And then, in 622 AD, something happened that would change the world more profoundly than almost anything before or since. The Prophet Muhammad and his earliest followers began what would become Islam. But here is a detail that most people do not know. Before that movement found its footing, when the earliest Muslims were being persecuted in Mecca, they were given sanctuary by the king of Aksum. The Negus, the Aksumite king Ashama ibn Abjar, received the Muslim refugees, heard their case, and refused to extradite them to their enemies, saying he had found in them no evil. The Prophet Muhammad, according to early Islamic tradition, forbade his followers from attacking Aksum, saying, "Leave the Abyssinians in peace, so long as they do not take the offensive." A Christian African king protected the earliest Muslims. The Prophet of Islam protected Aksum in return. It is one of the most remarkable moments of interfaith sanctuary in the history of religion, and it could not prevent what came next. Within a generation of Muhammad's death, the Islamic Caliphate had expanded with a speed that stunned the ancient world. Arabia, Persia, Egypt, Syria, North Africa, the Red Sea, the commercial artery that had sustained Aksum for 600 years, was now bordered on both sides by the most dynamic political and military force the world had seen since Alexander. Aksum's commercial dominance had been built on its position between Africa and the Roman world. The Roman world was contracting. The Islamic world was expanding. And Aksum, Christian, African, sitting between them, found the specific geography that had made it great, becoming a position of increasing isolation. The ports that had once received merchants from Rome and Persia and India simultaneously began to see fewer Roman ships. The trade route shifted. The gold that had once passed through Aksumite hands began to find other paths. And the land itself was failing. Centuries of intensive agriculture on the Ethiopian highlands, the same agriculture that had fed the populations, that built the Stelae and maintained the trade networks, had exhausted the soil. Deforestation, erosion, declining yields, the specific, slow, invisible destruction of the agricultural base that held everything else up. By the 7th century, the Aksumite kings were still ruling. The churches were still full. The faith was still alive. But the commercial empire, the system that had paid for the Stelae, the gold coins, the royal palaces, and the military campaigns, was contracting. The last Aksumite coins appear in the historical record around 700 AD. After 400 years of gold coinage, for centuries of putting the king's face on a disc of metal and declaring to every merchant who held it, "We are here, we are sovereign, we are powerful." The mint fell silent. Not destroyed, not looted, not ceremonially closed. Simply stopped. No one recorded the last coin being struck. No one announced the end of the currency. It simply stopped. Ethiopian tradition preserves the memory of a woman called Yodit, or Gudit, who attacked Aksum from the south in the late 9th or early 10th century. She is described as burning churches, destroying monuments, and massacring the Christian population. Whether she was a single historical figure, or a legendary condensation of events that unfolded over decades, the destruction she represents in the tradition appears real in the archaeological record. Churches showing signs of burning, monuments toppled, the city's population declining sharply. The Aksumite kings moved their capital south. They did not abandon their identity. They did not abandon their faith. They did not abandon their claim to be the heirs of Solomon and the Ark of the Covenant. They simply moved. And in moving, they carried with them something extraordinary: the continuity of a civilization. The Aksumite Empire ended. The Ethiopian Christian tradition, born in Aksum, sustained through its decline, carried by the people who moved south, did not. In the 12th century, 500 years after the last Aksumite coins were struck, a king named Lalibela built 11 churches from solid red rock in the Ethiopian highlands. He carved them downward into the earth, rather than building them upward. He connected them with tunnels cut through the rock. He built a river, called the Jordan, between them, for ceremonial bathing. The Church of St. George, a perfect cross carved from a single block of red rock, descending 12 meters below the surface, is possibly the most extraordinary single building in the history of African architecture. It was built in a civilization that had lost its commercial empire, its Red Sea dominance, its position among the 4 great powers of the world. It was built by people who had kept, through all of that loss, the thing that mattered most to them. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is one of the oldest Christian denominations in the world. It traces its foundation to Frumentius, the shipwrecked Syrian scholar, who tutored a king and became a bishop. The cross that appeared on Izana's coins in 340 AD still appears on Ethiopian church rooftops today. The faith that survived the loss of the empire outlasted the empire by 1600 years. And in Aksum itself, the original city, a single monk keeps watch over a chapel that Ethiopian tradition holds contains the Ark of the Covenant. Whether the Ark is there, whether it is what tradition says it is a question the Guardian has no interest in answering for the outside world. He watches. The tradition continues. The Stelae stand in the morning light. The Great One lies where it fell. The Aksumite Empire is not taught in the schools that teach Rome, and Greece, and China, and Persia. It does not have the Hollywood adaptations, the museum blockbusters, the famous battles reconstructed in slow motion on 100 documentaries. And yet, for 600 years, from roughly the 1st to the 7th century AD, Aksum was one of the 4 great powers of the world. It was one of the first nations on earth to adopt Christianity as a state religion. Its coins were used in markets from Egypt to India. Its merchants sailed the same seas as Rome's merchants, Persia's merchants, India's merchants. Its kings corresponded with Roman emperors as equals. And its faith, the specific, particular, African Christianity, that grew from a shipwrecked scholar and a curious king and a cross on a coin, has continued, without interruption, for 1600 years. Here is what the Aksumite Empire teaches us. Not about Africa. About all of us. Aksum lost its commercial empire because the world changed around it. The trade routes shifted. The political geography of the Red Sea transformed. The specific advantages that had made Aksum the crossroads of the ancient world became, in a new world order, less strategically critical. It was not destroyed. It was not conquered, not in the way that ends civilizations. It was bypassed. And here is the warning. Being bypassed is not always visible. From the inside, the Aksumite merchants did not see, in a single year, the trade route shift. They saw, gradually, fewer ships, smaller transactions, less gold moving through their hands. They adapted to each year's smaller surplus. And at some point, no one can say exactly when, the empire that had been one of 4 great powers was simply a regional kingdom that had once been something more. The great Stelae of Aksum lies where it fell, the largest single piece of stone ever quarried and moved by human beings. In the ancient world, it was built to stand forever. It fell, at some point in the long decline, and no one was powerful enough, or organized enough, or motivated enough to raise it again. But the churches of Lalibela still stand. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still meets. The Guardian still watches the chapel. In the city the Stelae marks. The cross still appears. On the rooftops of Aksum. Empires rarely die in one day. They lose their trade routes first, then their gold, then their influence, then their memory. But the things that empires build, when they are most themselves, the faith, the art, the architecture, the specific beauty of what they chose to spend their power on, those have a way of outlasting the power that built them. The Aksumite Empire is gone. But in the highlands of Ethiopia, its cross is still rising.